There is a sentence buried in Article 57 of the Spanish Constitution that will, one day, decide whether Leonor de Borbón is allowed to marry the person she loves. It doesn't mention her by name. It doesn't care who that person turns out to be. It simply states that if the heir to the throne marries against the express prohibition of the king and the Cortes Generales, that person is excluded from the line of succession, and so are their children, forever. That's the real shape of crown versus heart for a future Queen of Spain. It isn't a tabloid romance with a villain and a happy ending. It's a legal mechanism, written into the founding document of the country she will one day rule, that puts her family and her government in the room with her the moment she decides who to spend her life with. To understand how much weight that sentence carries, you have to understand what it actually asks of her. Article 57.4 of the 1978 Constitution states that if the person called to succeed the throne marries against the express prohibition of the king and the Cortes Generales, they are excluded from succession, along with their descendants. This isn't ceremonial language. It's operative. It means that unlike almost anyone else in Spain, Leonor cannot simply fall in love, propose, and marry. Her choice of spouse is, by constitutional design, subject to a form of institutional veto that no other 20-year-old in the country has to answer to. The law doesn't specify what would count as sufficient grounds for that prohibition. It doesn't list disqualifying nationalities, religions, or professions. That ambiguity is, in a way, the whole story. It means the boundary of who Leonor is allowed to love isn't fixed in advance. It's a live political question, to be decided by whoever holds power in the Cortes Generales at the moment she brings someone home. That is an extraordinary thing to carry into adulthood. Most people her age are free to make a serious mistake in love, learn from it, and move on with nothing more than a bruised heart. Leonor's mistakes, if the Constitution is ever invoked, could not be undone by regret. They could permanently rewrite the succession of the Spanish crown. This isn't a hypothetical dredged up for dramatic effect. It has already happened once in her own family, within living memory. In 1972, Alfonso de Borbón y Dampierre, a cousin of Juan Carlos I and, at the time, a legitimate rival claimant with his own case for the throne, married Infanta María del Carmen, sister of Juan Carlos. That marriage was itself a political maneuver, an attempt to consolidate competing claims within the family through matrimony rather than conflict. It's a reminder that in this family, marriage has never been treated as a purely private matter. It has always doubled as statecraft. Juan Carlos I's own marriage to Sofia of Greece in 1962 followed a similar logic. It strengthened Spain's monarchist ties to other European royal houses at a moment when the future of the Spanish crown itself was still genuinely uncertain, with Franco still alive and the restoration of the monarchy not yet secured. Love, if it was there, existed inside a marriage that was also doing important diplomatic work. Felipe VI broke from that pattern more visibly than any of his predecessors. His marriage to Letizia Ortiz in 2004 was, by any standard measure, a commoner marriage, a divorced journalist with no aristocratic lineage, marrying the future King of Spain. It was read at the time as a modernizing moment for the monarchy, proof that the institution could bend toward ordinary life. But it's worth being precise about what that moment actually proved and what it didn't. Felipe was already heir apparent with no living rival claim to displace him. The stakes of his choice, however personally significant, did not carry the same structural risk that a similar choice would carry for Leonor, whose position as the first woman poised to reign in nearly 150 years makes her marriage a subject of unusually intense institutional interest. There's another documented layer to this that rarely gets discussed with any precision, the question of a prenuptial agreement. Spanish royal and constitutional commentators have noted that a future queen's marriage would very likely involve formal legal arrangements addressing property, succession implications for any children, and the boundaries between personal assets and crown-linked obligations. This isn't unique to Spain, and it isn't necessarily sinister. European royal houses have handled marriage contracts this way for centuries. But it does mean that when Leonor eventually marries, heart doesn't get to operate in a private, unwitnessed space the way it does for most people. Lawyers, constitutional advisors, and quite possibly members of the government will have a seat at that table before she does. So what does falling in love actually look like for someone living inside that framework? Based on everything publicly documented about her approach to her royal duties so far, the honest answer is carefully and largely out of view. The royal household has maintained a consistent, deliberate silence around Leonor's personal relationships, a sharp contrast to the intense public curiosity surrounding the subject. Numerous stories claiming to identify a boyfriend have circulated across social media and lower-tier entertainment sites over the past 2 years, several of them mutually contradictory, none of them confirmed by the royal household, and at least one naming a person who does not appear to exist in the Belgian royal family at all. That gap, between the volume of speculation and the total absence of official confirmation, is itself revealing. It tells you how much appetite there is for this story, and how tightly the palace has chosen to control it. That control is not incidental. It's strategic, and it's consistent with the broader pattern this channel has covered before regarding Queen Letitia's approach to protecting her daughters from premature public exposure. If Leonor is seeing someone, the family's evident priority is to let that relationship develop away from cameras for as long as possible, not necessarily because there's anything to hide, but because a serious relationship exposed too early, under constitutional scrutiny, rarely survives the pressure intact. That brings us to the deeper version of Crown versus Heart, which isn't really about a specific person at all. It's about the architecture of choice itself. Leonor did not choose the 3 years of military training that just concluded. That was decided for her, by royal decree, before she turned 18. She did not choose to spend her adolescence at a boarding school in Wales rather than at home with her parents and sister. She did not choose to have her graduation ceremony, her military honors, and now presumably her future engagement treated as matters of state interest rather than private milestones. Every major decision point in her life to date has run through an institutional filter first, personal preference second. Marriage is the one place where that filter has real teeth, where the Constitution doesn't just shape the optics of her choice, but can nullify its legal consequences entirely. That's a different order of constraint than anything she's faced so far. Missing a training exercise has no permanent cost. Marrying, against the express prohibition of the king and the Cortes Generales, could, in theory, cost her children their place in the succession she's spent her entire life preparing to occupy. It's worth being fair to the other side of this, too, because the picture isn't purely restrictive. The threshold in Article 57.4 is a prohibition, not a requirement of prior approval for every candidate. In practice, Spanish constitutional scholars generally read this as a high bar, reserved for scenarios the crown and government would consider genuinely destabilizing, not a mechanism designed to veto any relationship the government finds merely inconvenient. Felipe VI's marriage to a divorced commoner suggests the institution, when it wants to, can absorb choices that once would have seemed unthinkable. The rules exist, but they've already proven more flexible in practice than their text alone would suggest. Still, more flexible than it looks, and no constraint at all, are very different things, and Leonor exists inside that gap. Whoever she eventually chooses to marry will have to survive not just her own judgment, but the judgment of a government, a parliament, and a national conversation about what a future queen's husband should represent to a country still working out what a modern monarchy is for. That's the real tension behind a title like Crown versus Heart. Not a secret romance waiting to be exposed, but a structural fact of her position. The most private decision a person makes in their life is, for her, also one of the most public and most legally consequential decisions the Spanish state has a stake in. Whether she finds a way to make that choice on her own terms, the way her father ultimately did, or whether the crown's terms end up shaping the heart's options before love even has the chance to speak, that's not a story anyone, including Leonor herself, has the ending to yet.